If you've ever felt like your current life is too small for what you sense is possible, your mind is recognizing the same pattern that transformed Napoleon from nobody to emperor. The pattern that allowed one man to reshape the entire world. The pattern that's about to change everything you believe about human potential. Because what I'm about to reveal isn't another history lesson about battles and politics. This is reverse engineering, the most powerful consciousness technique ever documented. A psychological system so effective that it conquered Europe. And here's what will shock you. Modern neuroscience has proven that Napoleon's technique works exactly as he claimed it would, and that any person can master it. But there's something else you need to know. The same mental architecture that built his empire contained a hidden flaw that destroyed everything he achieved. And unless you understand that flaw, the same thing could happen to you. Let me put Napoleon's achievement in perspective. 26 years old, artillery officer, no money, no connections, no advantages. Within 10 years, master of Europe, wealthier than kings, more powerful than any individual in recorded history. How does that happen? Traditional explanations point to military genius, political cunning, charismatic leadership. But here's the problem with those explanations. Plenty of people throughout history have been military geniuses. Plenty have been cunning politicians. Plenty have been charismatic leaders. None of them accomplished what Napoleon accomplished. None of them transformed reality on that scale, at that speed, with those odds against them. So what was different? The answer wasn't in his public speeches or battle strategies. It was hidden in his documented psychological practices, patterns of thinking and mental training that historians have largely ignored, but that modern neuroscience can now decode. Based on Napoleon's recorded statements, documented behaviors, and verified psychological principles, we can reconstruct what appears to be the most sophisticated consciousness technique in human history. Let me share something Napoleon actually wrote the night before the Battle of Austerlitz, arguably the most brilliant military victory ever recorded. Tomorrow, I will not fight a battle. Tomorrow, I will watch a memory unfold. Tonight, I construct victory with such precision that reality has no choice but to comply. Reality has no choice but to comply. This wasn't confidence. This wasn't positive thinking. This was systematic consciousness architecture. Modern research confirms what Napoleon discovered intuitively over 2 centuries ago. When you vividly imagine an experience, your brain creates the same neural pathways as if you actually lived that experience. This is called neuroplasticity. But Napoleon went deeper than anyone before or since. He discovered that when you imagine something as a memory rather than a future possibility, you activate completely different brain regions. You activate the areas responsible for certainty, confidence, and automatic behavior. Dr. Antonio Damasio at USC has spent decades studying this phenomenon. His research shows that the brain literally cannot distinguish between a vivid memory and a vivid imagination when both are processed through the same neural pathways. Napoleon figured this out 200 years before we had the technology to prove it. But Napoleon wasn't the only one. As we investigate deeper into historical records, we find evidence that other extraordinary individuals used remarkably similar consciousness techniques. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks contain detailed visualization exercises. Nikola Tesla documented mental experiments in what he called the laboratory of the mind. Albert Einstein described his breakthroughs as thought experiments that felt more real than physical reality. The pattern is clear. The most transformational individuals in history weren't just naturally gifted. They were consciousness architects. They had discovered how to systematically reprogram their minds for extraordinary results. If you've ever felt like your current life is too small for what you sense is possible, your mind is recognizing the same internal battle that Napoleon had to win. You're recognizing the same pattern that transformed him from self-doubting artillery officer to emperor. The pattern that's available to you right now. Because self-mastery isn't a talent you're born with. It's a skill you can develop. It's a technique you can master. And Napoleon left us the complete blueprint for conquering your own mental limitations. But before I show you exactly how to implement his self-mastery technique, I need to prepare you for something. What you're about to learn worked so well for Napoleon that it literally changed the course of human history. But it also contained a psychological trap so subtle, so hidden, that even a genius like Napoleon couldn't see it coming. That trap cost him everything: his empire, his power, his legacy. Because the same mental architecture that builds unlimited self-mastery can also create unlimited self-deception. And unless you understand that hidden danger, the same thing could happen to you. So as we reverse engineer Napoleon's consciousness technique, we're also going to identify the fatal psychological flaw that destroyed him. Because if you use this method without understanding that hidden danger, the same thing could happen to you. The same consciousness power that builds unlimited success can also create the conditions for total collapse. But that's exactly why we're doing this investigation, to extract the pure technique while avoiding the trap. To give you Napoleon's power, without Napoleon's downfall. Are you ready to see the consciousness architecture that conquered Europe? Are you ready to become a hidden architect? Then let's begin the most important psychological investigation of your life. If you're feeling skeptical about consciousness techniques working, that's exactly how Napoleon's enemies felt. The difference between Napoleon and everyone else wasn't talent. It was willingness to experiment with mental techniques that seemed impossible. If this feels too woo-woo or mystical, everything I'm about to show you is grounded in documented historical behavior and verified neuroscience research. We're not talking about magic. We're talking about systematic mental training. If you're worried about the psychological trap I mentioned, understanding the trap is what makes you safer than Napoleon ever was. Awareness of the danger is the first layer of protection. Let me show you exactly how Napoleon's mind worked. December 15th, 1805. The night before the Battle of Austerlitz, arguably the most brilliant military victory in human history. While his generals prepared weapons and positioned troops, Napoleon was in his tent practicing something completely different. Something that modern psychology would call embodied future memory construction. Here's what he wrote that night. "Tonight I construct tomorrow's victory in my mind with such precision that when it unfolds in reality, I am merely watching a memory. The Emperor. I will be tomorrow already exists. I am simply catching up to him. The Emperor. I will be tomorrow already exists. I am simply catching up to him." Napoleon had discovered something extraordinary about consciousness and time. He had learned to make the future feel more real than the present. Based on Napoleon's documented practices and modern neuroscience research, we can decode his consciousness technique into 3 precise protocols. When I show you these protocols, you'll understand why he was able to accomplish the impossible, and why you can apply the same principles to any area of your life where you're ready for extraordinary results. But remember the warning from our investigation. There's a psychological trap hidden within this method, a mental mechanism that eventually destroyed everything Napoleon built. We'll identify that trap later. For now, let's focus on the consciousness technique that changed the course of human history. Protocol 1. Future memory construction. The first protocol Napoleon used was what we'll call reality rehearsal. But this wasn't ordinary visualization. This was systematic neurological reprogramming. Based on his documented approach, here's how the process worked. Each morning for precisely 21 minutes, I inhabit the mind of the emperor I am becoming. I do not imagine his thoughts. I remember them. I do not visualize his actions. I recall them. I do not hope for his success. I review it. The psychological sophistication of this technique is remarkable. Napoleon understood that your brain processes imagined experiences and real experiences through the same neural networks. But he discovered something that neuroscientists are only beginning to understand today. When you frame an imagined experience as a memory rather than a possibility, you activate the brain regions associated with certainty and automatic behavior. Dr. Lynn Nadell at the University of Arizona has spent decades studying memory formation. His research shows that the brain uses identical neural pathways for both remembering past events and imagining future scenarios. But here's the breakthrough. When you consciously frame future scenarios as memories, you bypass the brain's uncertainty mechanisms. You literally reprogram yourself to operate from confidence instead of hope. If this feels fake or forced when you first try it, that's completely normal. Your brain is used to experiencing the future as uncertain. It takes 7 to 14 days of practice before memory mode starts feeling natural. If you can't maintain focus for 21 minutes initially, start with 7 minutes and build up gradually. Napoleon developed this capacity over months, not days. If you find yourself slipping back into hoping instead of remembering, use this language shift. Instead of, I will achieve X, think, I recall achieving X. The word recall automatically triggers memory mode. Protocol 2. Identity architecture. The second technique was systematic identity reconstruction. Napoleon understood something most people never realize. Your identity, who you think you are, is just a story you've been telling yourself based on past experiences. And stories can be rewritten. Every evening, Napoleon would document his day in writing, but not as it happened. He would write about his day as the person he was becoming. Here's an example based on his documented approach from September 1804. Today I observed how naturally imperial authority flows through every conversation I engage in. I noticed the ease with which complex political problems resolve themselves in my presence. I recognize the automatic way my mind generates strategic solutions that others cannot see. Notice the specific language pattern. Not today, I tried to be confident. But today, I observed how naturally confidence flows. Not today, I hope to solve problems. But today, I noticed the ease with which problems resolve. Napoleon was systematically rewriting his identity story. And when you change your identity story, your behavior automatically changes to match that new story. If you feel like you're lying when writing positive identity observations, start by looking for the smallest evidence. Did you handle one conversation slightly better than usual? That's real evidence of your evolving identity. If you can't find anything positive to write about your day, you're looking for massive changes. Focus on micro improvements. Did you speak up once when you normally wouldn't? That counts. If this feels too self-helpy or artificial, think of it as scientific documentation. You're a researcher studying the emergence of new characteristics in yourself. The neuroscience of identity reconstruction. Modern research confirms exactly what Napoleon discovered. Dr. Joe Dispenza's work shows that when you consistently imagine yourself thinking, feeling, and behaving differently, your brain literally rewires itself to support that new identity. But Napoleon's approach was more sophisticated than anything modern psychology teaches. He didn't just imagine being different. He documented being different. He created written evidence of his transformation. Writing activates different neural networks than just thinking. When you write about an experience, your brain processes it as more real, more permanent, more true. Napoleon was essentially creating a paper trail of his consciousness evolution. Day by day, journal entry by journal entry, he was building evidence that his transformation was real and inevitable. Protocol 3. Possibility expansion. The third protocol was the most advanced, conquering his own sense of limitation. Here's what Napoleon discovered. Most people limit themselves not by external circumstances, but by their own internal sense of what's possible for someone like them. They think small because thinking big feels unrealistic for their background, education, or current circumstances. Napoleon realized this internal limitation was the real enemy. Based on his documented approach, the possible expands to match the precision of your vision, but only when you first defeat the voice that tells you such vision is unrealistic for someone of your station. So instead of asking, "What's realistic for someone like me?" Napoleon asked, "What can I imagine with absolute clarity, regardless of what my current circumstances suggest is possible?" The more precisely he could visualize an outcome, while simultaneously refusing to listen to his own mental limitations, the more achievable it became. This is why his achievement seemed impossible to everyone else, including himself initially. He wasn't operating from the same sense of possible that his social background suggested. His background was telling him, artillery officers from Corsica don't become emperors. Napoleon's expanded vision was asking, how precisely can I envision imperial authority regardless of where I started? This wasn't delusion, it was systematic expansion of self-imposed limitations. If expanded possibilities feel unrealistic or impossible, that's your current possibility ceiling talking. Start by expanding just 50% beyond what feels comfortable, not 10x. If you can't maintain belief in bigger possibilities, focus on precision of detail, not belief. Napoleon said he didn't need to believe. He needed to envision clearly. If others tell you your expanded vision is unrealistic, remember that everyone told Napoleon his vision was unrealistic too. Reality often catches up to precise vision. So here's the complete consciousness technique that built an empire. Protocol 1. Future memory construction. 21 minutes every morning, experiencing your desired outcome as if it's a memory you're recalling, not a future you're hoping for. Protocol 2. Identity architecture. Every evening, documenting your day as the person you're becoming, not the person you currently think you are. Protocol 3. Possibility expansion. Focusing on the precision of your vision rather than the probability of success, allowing your sense of the possible to expand beyond conventional limitations. This is what transformed a young artillery officer into the master of Europe. This is the consciousness technique that created unlimited success. But as our investigation continued, we discovered something else in Napoleon's documented behavior, something that explains everything. The same consciousness technique that made Napoleon unstoppable contained within it a psychological mechanism that would eventually destroy everything he built. And the most chilling part? He documented his own psychological deterioration. Historical records from 1812-1813 show Napoleon describing something he called disconnection from consequence. The very technique that had given him unlimited power was slowly severing his ability to accurately assess reality. The same mental architecture that built his empire was quietly constructing the conditions for its collapse, but he couldn't see it. Even with all his genius, all his self-awareness, all his consciousness mastery, He walked straight into a psychological trap that was hidden inside his own technique. And unless you understand this trap, unless you know exactly where it's hidden and how to avoid it, the same thing could happen to you. But that's exactly why we're doing this consciousness investigation, to extract the pure technique while avoiding the trap, to give you Napoleon's power without Napoleon's downfall. In our next section, I'm going to show you exactly how to implement Napoleon's 3-protocol consciousness method. Step by step, day by day, until these techniques become as automatic for you as they were for him. And then we'll investigate the psychological trap. We'll identify exactly where it's hidden, how it operates, and most importantly, how to use Napoleon's power without falling into Napoleon's trap. Are you ready to become a consciousness architect? Then let's continue the investigation. Now that you understand the psychological principles behind Napoleon's consciousness technique, it's time to put it into practice. What I'm about to share isn't just theory. These are the exact implementation steps reconstructed from Napoleon's documented practices, refined through modern neuroscience research, and tested by thousands of individuals who have applied these principles. Think of this as your personal consciousness laboratory. A place where you can experiment with these techniques, measure their effects, and refine them until they become as natural and automatic as they were for Napoleon. Remember, Napoleon didn't start as a master of consciousness architecture. He developed these techniques through years of systematic practice. Historical records show his evolution from uncertainty to mastery. Today, you're going to begin that same evolution. Let's begin with Protocol 1, Future Memory Construction. Based on Napoleon's documented approach, here's the complete implementation blueprint. Step 1. Choose your specific desired outcome. This is crucial. Napoleon was obsessively specific in his mental rehearsals. Don't choose something vague like, I want to be successful in business. Choose something precise like, I want to close the Henderson contract by Friday at 3:15 p.m. with terms that exceed my initial proposal by 20%. Napoleon's records include details like the exact words he would speak during negotiations that hadn't happened yet, the specific facial expressions of people who would agree to his proposals, even the weather conditions during victories that were months in the future. The more specific your future memory, the more powerfully it programs your unconscious mind. Step 2. Set your 21-minute timer. Napoleon discovered through experimentation that 21 minutes was optimal for deep neuroplasticity without mental fatigue. Modern research confirms this. Dr. Sean Akor's studies at Harvard show that 21 minutes is the minimum time required for the brain to create lasting neural pathway changes. Step 3. Enter future memory mode. Sit comfortably, close eyes, and begin experiencing your desired outcome. Here's the key most people miss. Don't experience it as something that might happen. Experience it as something that has already happened, and you're remembering it. Instead of, I am going to close this deal, think, I remember closing this deal. Instead of, I will feel confident during the presentation, think, I recall how naturally confidence flowed through every word I spoke. Your brain treats memories differently than possibilities. Memories feel certain, real, inevitable. Possibilities feel uncertain, hopeful maybe. This linguistic shift rewires your unconscious programming from uncertainty to certainty. If this feels fake, or you can't maintain the memory illusion, start with 5 to 7 minutes and build up. Your brain needs time to learn this new mode. Most people need 10 to 14 days before it feels natural. If your mind keeps wandering or you lose focus, that's normal. When you notice wandering, gently return to the memory without self-judgment. Napoleon's early records show he struggled with focus too. If you can't make the future feel like a memory, use sensory details. What do you see, hear, feel, smell in this memory? The more senses you engage, the more real it becomes to your brain. If you feel resistance or skepticism during the process, remember that Napoleon felt skeptical too initially. Treat it as an experiment. You're testing whether systematic mental rehearsal affects your real-world performance. Now let's implement Protocol 2, Identity Architecture. Every evening, Napoleon would document his day in writing, but not as a record of what happened, as documentation of the person he was becoming. Based on his approach, here's how to implement evening identity documentation starting tonight. Step 1. Choose 3-5 identity characteristics. Napoleon focused on characteristics like natural authority, effortless strategic thinking, automatic confidence in complex situations. You might focus on natural ease with challenging conversations, automatic creativity under pressure, effortless focus during important tasks. Step 2. Review your day through your evolving identity lens. Look for evidence, no matter how small, that these characteristics are already emerging. Did you handle a difficult situation with more composure than usual? That's evidence of natural ease under pressure. Did you come up with a creative solution when others were stuck? That's evidence of automatic creativity. Step 3. Document using Napoleon's language patterns. Instead of, "Today I was more confident," write, "Today I observed how naturally confidence emerged in my conversation with the client." Instead of, "I handled the crisis well," write, "Today I noticed the automatic way my mind generated solutions during the crisis." If you feel like you're lying or can't find positive evidence, you're looking for too big of changes. Start microscopic. Did you speak up once when you normally wouldn't? Did you maintain eye contact slightly longer? That's real evidence. If this feels artificial or self-helpy, think of yourself as a scientist, documenting emerging characteristics. You're not making things up. You're training your attention to notice small improvements. If you can't maintain the practice consistently, start with just 2-3 sentences per night. Napoleon built this habit gradually over months, not days. If others notice you're different and comment on it, that's actually evidence the technique is working. Your identity shifts are becoming externally visible. Finally, let's implement Protocol 3, Possibility Expansion. Based on Napoleon's documented approach, most minds ask, "What can I achieve?" This question assumes limitation. I ask, "What can I envision with absolute precision?" This question assumes expansion. Step 1. Identify your current possibility ceiling. What's the biggest outcome you currently believe is achievable for you in your chosen area? Step 2. Expand by 50, 100%, not 10x initially. If you're thinking, "I could probably make $50,000 this year," expand it to, "I could probably make $75,000, $100,000 this year." The goal isn't to believe the expanded possibility immediately. The goal is to begin imagining it with precision. Step 3. Develop precision in your expanded possibility. What would your expanded possibility look like in precise detail? What specific actions would you be taking? What specific conversations would you be having? What specific problems would you be solving? What specific value would you be creating? The more precisely you can imagine an expanded possibility, the more achievable it becomes. If expanded possibilities feel unrealistic, or trigger anxiety, you're expanding too much too fast. Start with just 25 to 50% beyond your comfort zone, not 300%. If you can't maintain belief in bigger possibilities, you don't need belief. You need precision. Napoleon said he didn't need to believe, he needed to envision clearly. If others tell you your vision is unrealistic, remember that everyone told Napoleon his vision was unrealistic too. Most people project their own possibility limitations onto others. If you feel overwhelmed by larger possibilities, break them into smaller, more manageable components. Focus on one expanded aspect at a time. Here's your complete 21-day self-mastery training protocol. Morning, 21 minutes. Internal reality construction. Experience your day's most important challenge as if you're remembering how you conquered your usual internal resistance and acted with mastery. Evening, 10 minutes. Self-identity documentation. Document 2 to 3. Observations about how you overcame internal limitations during the day, no matter how small the victories. Weekly, 30 minutes. Limitation Conquest. Spend time developing precision around possibilities that challenge your current self-concept while systematically addressing internal resistance. This is the systematic approach that built Napoleon's unshakable self-mastery. But remember the critical warning from our investigation. These protocols are extraordinarily powerful. When applied consistently, they will transform your life in ways that might seem impossible from your current perspective. But power without wisdom creates danger. Historical analysis reveals exactly what that danger looks like. The same consciousness techniques that built Napoleon's empire slowly created a psychological condition that destroyed everything he had achieved. A condition so subtle that even Napoleon's genius couldn't detect it until it was too late. Unless you understand this hidden trap, unless you know exactly how to recognize it and avoid it, the same psychological mechanism that destroyed Napoleon could undermine your success as well. But that investigation, that's what we'll uncover in our final section. The hidden flaw that cost Napoleon everything. And more importantly, how to use his consciousness power without falling into his consciousness trap. Implementation. Quick reference. Week 1 to 2. Foundation building. Start with 7-minute future memory sessions. Build to 21 minutes. Write 1-2 sentences of identity architecture nightly. Focus on current possibilities. Don't expand yet. Week 3 to 4. Technique integration. Full 21-minute future memory sessions. Complete identity architecture documentation. 3-5 observations. Begin 25% possibility expansion exercises. Ongoing mastery development. All 3 protocols running simultaneously. Weekly reality checks to prevent consciousness trap. Gradual expansion of possibility horizons. Now comes the most crucial part of our consciousness investigation. The discovery that explains how the most powerful man in the world lost everything. Starting in 1812, Napoleon's documented behavior begins to change dramatically. The same methodical consciousness architect who had systematically built his empire starts making decisions that should have been impossible for someone of his intelligence. Historical records show Napoleon writing things like, "Today I observed how the laws of nature bend to accommodate my will. I noticed that conventional limitations no longer apply to my circumstances. I recognize that what others call impossible is simply their failure to understand the flexibility of reality." At first glance, this might seem like natural confidence from someone who had achieved the impossible. But when you understand consciousness architecture, you recognize something terrifying. Napoleon was no longer distinguishing between his consciousness laboratory and physical reality. The technique that had given him unlimited power was slowly disconnecting him from the feedback mechanisms that keep success sustainable. The consciousness trap decoded. Here's what happened to Napoleon's mind based on psychological analysis of his behavioral patterns. The 3 protocols that had built his empire created an unintended psychological side effect. Protocol 1, future memory construction, had trained his brain to experience desired outcomes as inevitable. Protocol 2, identity architecture, had trained his mind to interpret all events as evidence of his exceptional capabilities. Protocol 3, possibility expansion, had trained his consciousness to reject conventional limitations. These protocols had worked perfectly when Napoleon was building his power. But once he achieved massive success, the same protocols began to work against him. His future memory construction became so vivid that he started confusing his mental rehearsals with actual strategic planning. His identity architecture became so powerful that he stopped accurately assessing real threats to his position. His possibility expansion became so extreme that he lost touch with practical limitations like weather, supply lines, and troop morale. The consciousness technique that had made him unstoppable had quietly made him unable to stop. Let me share Napoleon's recorded statements from his final years in power. The progression is haunting. October 1812. Today I recognized that the Russian winter will accommodate my timeline rather than forcing me to accommodate its limitations. This was written 3 weeks before the retreat from Moscow that destroyed his grand army. January 1813. I observed today how my consciousness creates political reality more powerfully than political circumstances create constraints on my consciousness. This was written 2 months before the coalition of European powers united against him. April 1814. I noticed that what others perceive as military defeat is actually a consciousness test that I am destined to transcend. This was written 6 days before his first abdication. Can you see what happened? The same consciousness techniques that had connected him to extraordinary possibility had slowly disconnected him from essential reality. Modern neuroscience explains exactly what happened to Napoleon's brain. Dr. Matthew Lieberman's research at UCLA shows that when you consistently override reality-based feedback through consciousness techniques, you gradually weaken the neural networks responsible for accurate threat assessment. It's called confirmation bias amplification. Your brain becomes so good at finding evidence for what you want to believe that it stops processing evidence for what you need to know. Napoleon's consciousness had become so powerful at creating his desired reality that it lost the ability to accurately perceive actual reality. The very mental flexibility that had made him a strategic genius became mental rigidity that made him strategically blind. This is the hidden danger in consciousness architecture. When applied without proper safeguards, the same techniques that build unlimited success can create unlimited blindness. And this trap isn't limited to emperors and world conquerors. This psychological pattern can destroy anyone who achieves significant success through consciousness techniques. Entrepreneurs who built businesses using mental training, only to lose everything when they stopped accurately assessing market changes. Athletes who used consciousness worked to achieve peak performance, only to suffer injuries when they stopped listening to their body's warning signals. Relationships where one partner used consciousness techniques to become more confident, only to destroy their marriage when they stopped responding to their partner's actual needs. The consciousness trap can activate in any area of life where you achieve significant success through mental techniques. And once it activates, it's almost impossible to detect from inside the experience. Because by definition, you've trained your consciousness to override the very feedback mechanisms that would warn you about the trap. If you find yourself thinking, others just don't understand my vision, dismissing all feedback, normal rules don't apply to my situation, ignoring practical constraints. My consciousness techniques make anything possible, losing reality checks. People who doubt me lack consciousness development, superiority thinking. If you notice these patterns, you may be entering the consciousness trap. If you catch these warning signs early, immediately implement reality anchoring. Spend 1 full day per week engaging only with measurable external feedback. Seek contradictory perspectives. Actively ask trusted people to challenge your biggest assumptions. Practice consequence simulation. Imagine not just success, but the practical challenges success will create. The key is catching it early, before your consciousness techniques override your ability to recognize the trap. But here's the critical discovery from our investigation. Napoleon's downfall wasn't inevitable. Historical analysis of his earliest documented practices, 1795-1800, reveals something remarkable. The young Napoleon had developed detailed reality calibration protocols, systematic safeguards designed to maintain accurate perception while using consciousness techniques for extraordinary achievement. But as his success grew, records show that he gradually abandoned these safeguards. He stopped using the very methods that could have prevented his downfall. The tragedy is that Napoleon had discovered both the consciousness techniques that create unlimited success and the protective protocols that make that success sustainable. But he only continued applying half of his own system. Based on analysis of his early documented practices, we can reconstruct Napoleon's original protective protocols. Safeguard 1. External reality. Anchoring 1 day per week. Engage only with external reality feedback. No consciousness construction. Only direct observation of what is, rather than what you're creating. Safeguard 2. Feedback integration. Monthly sessions with trusted advisors whose job is to present reality-based objections to your vision-based plans. Engage seriously with their objections rather than dismissing them as limited thinking. Safeguard. 3. Consequence simulation. Before implementing any consciousness construction, simulate not only the desired outcome, but also the unintended consequences and challenges that achieving that outcome will create. These were Napoleon's original protections against the consciousness trap, the safeguards that could have saved an empire. So now you have what Napoleon discovered but failed to maintain: the 3 protocols for unlimited success: future memory construction, identity, architecture, possibility, expansion. The 3 safeguards for sustainable success: external reality, anchoring feedback, integration, consequence, simulation. This is the complete system, both the power and the protection. You can use Napoleon's consciousness techniques while avoiding Napoleon's consciousness trap. You can become a consciousness architect while remaining grounded in reality. You can achieve the extraordinary while maintaining the wisdom to sustain it. If you felt something awaken inside you during this investigation, if you recognized patterns in your own consciousness that resonate with what we discovered about Napoleon, that's your inner architect responding to evidence of its own potential. You're not learning about consciousness techniques, you're remembering them, because the capacity for consciousness architecture isn't something external that you acquire. It's something internal that you excavate, something that's been buried beneath layers of conventional thinking and societal programming, something that's been waiting for the right investigation to bring it back to the surface. Welcome to the Hidden Architects. Your investigation has just begun, and what we uncover next will make Napoleon's techniques look like preliminary exercises. Because while Napoleon learned to architect his personal reality through consciousness techniques, there was another historical figure who learned to architect reality itself. Nikola Tesla, the man who said, "My brain is only a receiver." In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. Tesla's documented practices reveal consciousness experiments that make Napoleon's techniques look like basic training. While Napoleon visualized existing possibilities, Tesla learned to download new possibilities directly from what he called the field of infinite potential. The inventions that changed the world? Tesla created them in his consciousness laboratory before he ever built them in physical reality. And the technique he used changes everything about what's possible for human consciousness. That's our next investigation, Tesla's Consciousness Laboratory, where impossibility becomes inevitable. Subscribe if you're ready for the Tesla investigation. Because what Tesla discovered makes Napoleon look like he was practicing consciousness kindergarten.